Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw. The other photo you sent, it looks like a shopping cart with, or just actually, no, it's one of those baskets. Yeah. So it's a basket. It's called Spice of Life.
Yeah.
Chilies in, is it Beyoğlu? Istanbul?
Yeah.
And it's those super dried chilies, very, very wrinkled. The image is just taken from the top, looking down. They're probably, I mean, whatever. There's probably hundreds of, let's just say, of these dried chilies. It's a nice image. It's, not especially arresting as a photograph. So, but what?
It's not creative at all.
But wait, how is it representative? What is it communicating for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this is just your typical kind of tourist image of, oh, the food is so good in Istanbul and the ingredients that go into the food are so amazing. But really, to me, that sums up kind of the experience overall. So a few months ago, I started collaborating with this artist, gallery owner / residency director in Athens. We're the same age. We're both born in California, but we've lived in France, and his dad is from Shanghai and just has a very similar complementary background to mine. And we started talking. And then he said in October, he said, oh, why don't we meet? I said, well, you can't come to Hong Kong and I can't come to Europe because they won't let Americans in. And we said, well, where could we meet? Istanbul or Croatia? And so we chose Istanbul just to meet and see if these collaborations that we discussed could work and other collaborations maybe could work. So yeah, and we actually got the news that a grant that I'd applied for from the HKPU / JCCAC to put together a show in Athens next summer, that we got the grant. So we got, good news, and the collaboration is, anyway, it's going.
Oh, wicked.
But for me, really, yeah. And so to me, the chili is just, the image of that, it just represents unexpected. You never know what one of these chilies is going to taste like because they're all so different. The heat is different. The texture is different. How you chop it up, how you use it. And we just both took a chance. So when we booked the trip, it was pretty straightforward. It looked pretty straightforward. And then Greece cut off all flights to Turkey. They cut off all transportation to Turkey.
Oh.
He had to book 2 flights going and 2 flights back. He was delayed by 2 days going. And then I was delayed 3 days coming back because of flights. So it just ended up being this craziest travel experience ever. For just a week.
A hot mess. A big pile of hot chili mess.
Yeah. But wonderful chili.
Nice.
So I love spicy food. And yeah, I have to say Turkish food or Eastern Mediterranean food is some of the best I've had in my life. It's just incredible.
Wicked. Because you're an artist, you've thought about visual expression, and do you normally work in, 2D? I mean, do you do mixed media? Do you do walk us through your training as an artist?
Sure. So my background was in two-dimensional work, mostly painting and printmaking during university. I went to the University of Minnesota, where I lived in that state for 17 years. And then for the last about 15 years, I used a lot of alternative photo processes. Cyanotype was the main one, and then also Van Dyke printing, a bit of gum bichromate. I really liked how the unpredictability of these elements work together. And now I tend to do different kinds of media, again, mostly two-dimensional, but also that work with architecture. And they spring from architecture and humans' interactions with architecture, and they wrap around architecture as well, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not usually interested in making something flat that hangs on a wall, but something very large scale that wraps around the wall, and you have to kind of move to interact with it and interface with it. So my day job is as artist in residence with an education foundation here. And so I design a lot of artworks that students can help me make.
Oh, okay.
They're very large scale that give them kind of ownership of the space. That's my day job that allows me to live in one of the most expensive cities in the world. People are like, wow, do you have family money? You have a rich husband? No. Mm-hmm. It's just the grace of this job,
Wicked.
that I can do that. And so, yeah, it's 2D, but when you interact with it, it's kind of 3D. I have to think 3D in order to make it work with the architecture. If that makes sense. And it tends to be monochrome.
Okay. So first of all, you have a website. I'm going to put it up certainly the YouTube clip, and definitely where people can click on in the description. What is your website, please?
It's ebriel.com. First initial, last name.com.
Can you spell that?
Sure. EBRIEL.com.
Fantastic. Yeah. So look, let's get more people to look at your work. So for example, let's just say there's a timeline, there's an arc, whatever you want to call it, right? In my day job, I do things like leadership training, leadership coaching. In terms of service leadership, in terms of doing this work, okay, so there's this arc, right? We start, we develop, and as we progress through life, we get more experience and all this stuff. So why don't you take us through the journey of your development on your website? I can only imagine that you've grouped your work. If you have a lot of work, it's going to group it in terms of themes, right? Has there been a progression in terms of the thematics of what you've done? So you're talking about how you've been on this 1 year project, roughly aligned with the pandemic, that culminated recently with that work. So how have those themes progressed?
That's a really good question. And I will say about my website, it's basically kind of a holding storage. And a lot of my older work is not on it because I don't really like it anymore. It doesn't have a lot to do with what I'm doing now. So you won't see a whole lot of that on there. You will actually see, can I just pitch my Instagram as well? Which
do it.
I thought I'd put it in. Yeah, okay. So my Instagram is basically similar. It's Briel Art. So it's E, B as in boy, R, IEL, ART. And that's my Instagram. And there you can find updated things, what I'm working on. We can follow one another, etc. I follow a lot of Hong Kong artists on that. I would say probably the journey of my art has also followed my art life journey, as it does with many artists. It's been through a lot of countries. So like I did an apprenticeship in Italy and another in, so when I was younger, I would go to Europe to learn things basically as a student. Self-financed, and then as I got older, I said, hey, there's this amazing continent out here, Asia. I don't know a lot about it, aside from what I read. I need to experience it. How can I afford to go there? I'll go there as an English teacher. And that's how I started in Asia. But I always wanted to be working with art in some way, not just as a studio artist, but in the world. And having a reciprocal relationship with where I am and the places and the people of where I am. And over time, that has really changed a lot from kind of illustrative work, which was a lot of portraits and honestly work that I really don't like anymore, kind of old-fashioned, and then working more conceptually with text and different languages as I was learning new languages and learning Chinese, Mandarin in Beijing, and then photography, but in a more painterly way with alternative photochemistry. And then I really got interested in how did the sun in Cambodia, where I was living, how does it interact differently with this chemistry than in Hong Kong, where I lived afterwards? And so all these things, these nuances, and that's where I became really aware of this place, this time, it's unique. And that's what this pandemic is as well right now. And that's why I'm making the work here right now.
Yeah. No, don't let me interrupt. I'm just kind of responding. I'm just saying, yes, full on, yes.
And I also became, along the way, quite preoccupied with what they call material culture, which is, in an art sense, you bring in anthropology, who makes these art materials that you are working with and how. And for me, that became part of the story of what I'm using and why. It became part of the work implicitly, because I always picture who made this. What are their lives like? Without them, I couldn't make this work. And it became a way of kind of reaching out with the communities that I was in. And then I was commissioned to research the handmade paper of Southeast Asia for my publisher, and then wrote about that. And that led me to actually one of the projects at my studio in Hong Kong at JCCAC called Art Materialist, which is essentially bringing art materials to the forefront, looking at them in different ways and talking to people who make them and use them in different ways. Anything from anthropologists to dyers and all sorts of things, which has led to other things. I think about art not just as a painter sitting in the studio, but art in the world, art interacting with people. I couldn't make it without them, even if it's mine. Yeah.
One thing you had mentioned earlier about you had lived in Beijing and say or in northern China or whatever, and walking around, and I've also been to Beijing, and I'd gone just to do a kind of a research trip on electric motorcycles, and where the plant was based was in the middle of this industrial area, and when I landed there, it was literally ash, post-apocalyptic sky. You could taste the grit. You could taste the. I know. Yeah. So when you said, you could kind of taste it was like this weird carbon taste in the air. Yeah,
Mhm.
yes, I know that. Yeah, and in a weird way, when you described that, and then looking at the print, which is essentially when you imprinted the paper, and then afterward went over it with the brush.
Exactly.
It's almost like you applied the artifact, after the fact to say, well, this is how the breath of the building showed up. So when you connected that to living in Beijing, and I was just like, yeah, that definitely, if you've been there, you know what that feels like.
Especially around Chinese New Year. So around that time, everybody's left town. They've got fireworks at the time. Fireworks were going off everywhere, ash raining through the air. It was the most post-apocalyptic. The only thing that kept me going were the little oranges. They're
Uh-huh.
so good in the
Uh-huh.
winter. They're so sweet. But it's still like that during an apocalypse. They don't happen often anymore. But yeah, you can taste it.
Absolutely. And as we're talking about this, I've got this image of the chilies in front of my face. One of the little clips I have on the Facebook page for Shooting It Raw is of me trying a scorpion pepper, and it's supposed to be
Oh, wow.
one of the spiciest peppers. So I eat half of one. So it gave me a panic attack, but as they do. Let's pick the next photo. You want to move on to the next photo because you sent it to me just before the call. So, is life really a gift? Really? Can you make every second count? That's the whole point of the podcast. So, if you like what you've seen and you're inspired, because that really is my mission, then please give it a like, subscribe, and share.
Shooting it raw?
Yes, Shooting It Raw.